Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all virtually. And I'm Dr. Kat. I'm going to be talking today about empathy in games. If my slide does not advance, please let me know. Should advance right then. And it's just really grateful for you to have me here. I am an associate professor and director of our Games and Emerging Media program at Marist, a university in the New York metro area. And I'm also a consultant at a variety of different places, including the World Health Organization, where I am a game designer. And I'm so thrilled also to talk about some of the research I've been doing on games, empathy, and ethics over the past few years. Here are some of my publications. Those first two books on the bottom left, Learning, Education, and Games, there's actually a third, and all three are available to download for free if you're interested. All right, so one thing that I absolutely love is that if you have any questions, if you're interested in any, hearing more about anything, please feel free to interrupt me. You can type in the chat. But right now, what I want you to do is, I know that you can't speak out loud, but you can at least close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a new world. And when you're ready, write in the chat a few phrases about what kind of world you would want to see if we could design our own world. So take a few minutes to dream, to imagine, to wonder what kind of world we might have. And so far, someone wrote an Operation Utopia. Okay, very interesting. Another person wrote less poverty, better health, less gravity. Let me tell you something, Adam. I'm always thinking about that. Like, I'm constantly dropping things. I'm like, I think gravity is my enemy. Fluid, less stress. I love all of these. These are great. Anybody else have any phrases that they want to share for their new world? Cure all diseases. Oh, I like that, especially being a designer for the World Health Organization. Super important to be a healthy world. Anyone else want to chime in? Fantastic. So keep thinking about that. Keep dreaming. The kind of world I'm personally interested in is one, and when I think about it, these are the words that pop up into my head. One filled with compassion and care, connection, empathy, and inclusion. A place where everybody feels like they belong. And I don't think we have that right now. I really, unfortunately. But my hope as a professor and a game designer is that I can help to design a better world. And so just a couple different definitions, just so we're all on the same page. Empathy is this idea that we're feeling what another is feeling or thinking from someone else's perspectives. Compassion is about not only caring about those perspectives, but also taking some kind of action. So getting them water when they're thirsty, or helping to hold their hand when they're grieving, those kinds of actions. But let me tell you, if you apply those two words to gaming, there's a lot of different possible ways that people are thinking about it. I wrote a paper with Matthew Farber about the different definitions of empathy in games, and we came up with many, many that we saw in the literature. And even though it's a burgeoning field, already we don't have these set definitions for what this even is. And they're so complex, just thinking about empathy and compassion. There's so many different ways we can consider it, but also there's so many different ways to apply it to gaming. And gaming is also complex. So this statistic really sits in my head a lot, and it's that over 80% of online game players, so people that play games online with others, have faced hate and or harassment. 80%, over 80%, while playing online games. And this was part of the ADL's No Place for Hate study that they started a few years ago. They've been doing these annual studies. It's free if you want to Google it. You can find out all sorts of stats on this. So they look at all different kinds of games. Yeah, right, Nicholas, it seems like an underestimate. But on the other hand, what stat I really do like is this one, which is that 99% of online game players have developed some kind of bond with others, right? Have helped other people, have had pro-social experiences through online gaming. So while we have cruelty and toxicity at one end, we also have these really beautiful, compassionate, and caring activities on the other. Hopefully my slides are still advancing, and you can see a picture of my book where I write about some of these issues, and I make the argument that games are communities. They are social media. They are where we are connecting, where we're talking about civics and social issues, where we're trying to figure out who we are and also the world that we want to create. And my hope is that we can design more compassionate and caring, not only games and gaming communities, but can we actually also make a better world by learning from games? Oh, I love all these comments. Thank you so much. General Gonzalez, thank you. Yes, we are hopeful, obviously, that we want to make a better world, but could we also find out how to do that by looking at some games? And so I just want to share a couple of games with you. Some of them are free, some of them aren't, if you ever want to play them. I do have links for you that I can share after the program if you're interested. And the first one is that it, shouldn't surprise anyone, but if you create a caring community, it inspires people to be caring. So if we can make a supportive, well-moderated community, and that's, not just moderation. I'm not talking about like the punishing moderation, but the kind of moderation where you're giving people gentle nudges, that you're supporting and actively supporting and modeling good behavior, that you're proactively trying to create that caring community from the very beginning through design. And so your sole purpose, really, you're not your only purpose, but your main purpose is to design for a caring community, right? So that you are not only creating a fun, engaging game or any kind of system, any kind of institution, but that you're designing it with care in mind. And that, as a designer of that community, whether it's in a game or beyond, that you are also, I'm sorry if I'm freezing up, that you're also prioritizing care for your players. So this idea of the ethic of care, right? That we are thinking about our obligation to our players, that we should be caring for the players that are in our communities or in our civic institutions or in any kind of system that we have built. We should be caring for these people and for each other. And that care needs to be embedded in every single design decision that we make. All right, no questions so far, so I will keep going. And this game, by the way, I didn't even tell you the name of the game. It's called Kind Words. This is a really great example of a game that creates a caring community. It is, oh, this is a great question, Nicholas. There's an amazing new article that just came out. I'm not sure if it's public yet, but I can definitely share a copy if you want to email me. It's from a community that's trying to make better moderation, and their focus is how do we do that to encourage it in a way that is not just through punishments. Like, in other words, you're not just banning people, you're not just getting rid of people, but you're actually scaffolding that, right? You're giving them the kind of just-in-time messaging so that they can make better choices. And actually, kind words is a good example of this, because as soon as you enter this game, it's giving you information that you need so that you can write, which is what is part of this game, kind words to other people. So in this game, you're making letters, you're sending letters to other people, and you're trying to connect with other people. It's all anonymous. And so you're able to send letters where you're asking for help from other people, and you're also able to respond to letters to help other people. So for example, when I was writing my book, and you could see it in the image here, I was worried about finishing my book, We the Gamers. I didn't feel like it was good enough. I was like, at that point where you're so worried about if you can finish. And I got back these really amazing letters from these anonymous people, and you could read it right here. It says, "Don't be too harsh on yourself. I am sure the book you are writing is amazing. We all have insecurities with the things we create or produce, but most of the time we are too harsh on ourselves. I encourage you to finish it. You got this, and I am proud of you." It's like a real person wrote that to me. And what's nice is that in the game, they were getting advice, just-in-time advice on how to make a better letter. They were also having these letters be moderated, right, reviewed by people who could then give advice to people and, give them helpful tips for making a more inclusive and kind letter in the future. I just want to make sure I'm catching up on the questions that we have so far. So Rich asked, how can we ensure that a games community and facilitators are supportive, even if the subject matter is deliberately, wow, uncomfortable? Okay, so games about war, survival, refugees, mature content. Yes, so not only do the people who are playing the game need to be educated and scaffolded, but what you're saying is that the facilitators do too, right? So we need to, train the trainers, like who's watching the people who are watching. And it does need to be that kind of emotionally vulnerable space where people can make mistakes, but can learn from them and can not suffer dire consequences from working through some of these uncomfortable topics. That said, we want to protect people and make sure that we're not at risk for engaging in people's problematic mistakes, right? So it's a balance, right? We have to really be constantly and dynamically really not only training ourselves and reflecting on what we've done, but also continuing to listen to our audience and to get feedback and to be iteratively redesigning our system. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in the future. But I think also making sure that if you do have a situation where subject matter is uncomfortable, that you have subject matter experts, you have people who are perhaps refugees who are trying to make sure that the representation of refugees is appropriate. And I'll be also talking about that in just a moment. And then we have another question here from General Gonzalez that says, how do war game story writers create narratives that encourage and help reveal the heroic hostages common in most stories? Okay, so are you saying that you want counter narratives to that kind of like constant trope, or is it something? Oh, okay, sorry. So like a princess who can help to rescue herself rather than Mario just rescuing her. Is that what you mean? Finding ways to tell other stories like that, or to support people to... We'll come back to your question at the end, because I want to make sure that I understand it. And okay, a franchise before you knew the consequences. All right, so what you're worried about is that if you don't know where it's going, that it might have consequences that you don't imagine. I mean, part of the issue, and I'll talk about this in a few moments, is that we don't always know how our representation, right, our game is going to be interpreted and seen and used in the future. So we do always have to be dynamically incorporating in those changes and those the perspectives that we've grown from, right? Okay, so you didn't have control of your creative control over your product, and that's another issue that I will be bringing up in just a moment. So the second thing that I have observed from games that I think that we can use in making a more inclusive world is that making sure that we can fully and readily express ourselves in that community. People who can actually fully express themselves and be who they are will feel more belongingness, will feel more ownership, really like creative control over their own stories, over their own game, and will feel more concluded, right? They'll feel safe to bring their whole selves and to be able to connect with others. And this game right here is a popular game called Animal Crossing New Horizons. You can see that I've designed my own character in this game. And I, played this right when the pandemic was starting. And it was, a way to connect with a world through a virtual world, right? Connecting with other people. My daughter also played this game and she designed her home, for example, to have water in it and to be filled with fishes and fish bowls, kind of like an aquarium because she likes water. And then my home was like a cozy library filled, book filled den. And so we were able to share these virtual worlds with each other and to understand each other better. All right, so in this third game, I have, oh, thank you for that reference for the Proteus effect. In this third game is called Quandary. And in this game, you are trying to solve a number of problems on a fictional world called Braxos. You are people who are starting a new society, and you have to, for example, figure out what to do about these sheep-like creatures, and to decide what the best solution is. Do we trap the Yashir that are eating the sheep? Do we give them poison? What do we do about it? And so your job is to go to all these people and ask them what they think would be the best solution. And they give you perspectives, and you have to sort these into different, whether it's a fact, a solution, another kind of opinion, and then you have to build evidence to make your own solution. And what's really interesting about this is that you don't get points on getting the right solution, but you get points on building evidence, building a case, and evaluating other people's ideas in your journey to a solution. So in other words, the process of problem solving gets incentivized. And so I think, this is a free game, by the way. You can look up Quandary. I think it's quandarygame.org or quandarygame.com, one of those. And in this game, you can, one of your sons is named Proteus. Very cool. You can learn from this in that it's really important that we listen to each other's ideas and when we're trying to figure out how to make our world better. And just to really emphasize that point, it's not just about listening, but it's actually about giving up control in some ways, because we want to include different voices, not only as perspectives that we sort through, but also people, as arbiters, as decision makers, as people with power to make those decisions and to implement them. And so one of the things that I've also written about, and if you kind of combine this with my other book, this is Knowledge Games. And in this book, I write about these kinds of games that crowdsource scientific solutions from our world. So one of the more popular examples of this is called Fold It, where you are working with other people through a game to fold and try to understand the structure of different proteins. And through that relationship between computers and people, you are able to help solve problems that couldn't be solved by computers alone. And it couldn't be solved by one lab. It is solved instead by many, many people who are working together. This other example, if you see on the right, is Borderlands Science, and that also crowdsources some scientific problem solving through the game playing. And what's nice about it is that it's fully integrated into the game, right? So it's a popular, one of the things that's hard to do is to get people to play your game. And so this is already a popular game, and they have partnered with scientists to create these kinds of little like mini scientific problem solving games within their bigger game. And that actually helps to solve real world science problems. And a question that I always have is, could we do this not only for scientific problems, but could we also try to solve social issues? Could we teach a game how to make a kinder world? And there have been games that have tried to be like this. There was one a few years ago that evidently is not around anymore. It was called School Life. It was made by an affiliate from Harvard. And what it was doing was it was helping to find solutions to bullying in schools. And so it would ask you different questions, like while you were in this game, and you would give it answers. And through natural language processing, you were basically helping to teach the artificially intelligent computer algorithm, right, to learn better solutions to bullying. So it was really trying to like crowdsource bullying solutions. And we could also think about it as like, could we teach AI to find solutions that are making a kinder world, right? So really kind of getting into that very nuanced social issue. Is that something we could also do in addition to scientific solutions? All right. Okay, so I'm a little, hold on one second, because I'm having a little trouble getting to the comments, and I want to make sure I get to them. Okay, so we have, how can designers avoid the issues of crowdsourcing game design severely divergent opinions? That's a great question. There's also this idea of like the tragedy of the commons, right? So that if you have too many opinions that really aren't very good, that they kind of overtake some of the more nuanced and less popular opinions. Like there was like a Bodie McBoat or something like a few years ago. There was a crowdsource of a boat name, and that's what people ended up naming it, because that's what won, and it wasn't maybe necessarily the most useful name. So my book goes into some of those issues and how to solve them, and also talks about some of the ethical issues that we have with crowdsourcing opinions, crowdsourcing ideas. And so it's not just about like crowdsourcing and making sure to include diverse opinions, but it's also about properly evaluating them and giving people that space to be listened to, but then also to evaluate those in terms of whether it's a good solution, right? So that's another, there's that other step of analysis and using it to understand whether it would be a good solution or not. Okay. So next up, we have another thing that we can learn from games, which is that perspective taking can help us to build connection, but only if we really design it well. And so one of the issues that I've found with some games is that they give you this little glimpse into someone else's life, and then you go back to your own life, and then you think that you've taken on someone's perspective, but really it's just your own understanding of them, and rather than what they really are going through. And so, like, taking on someone's perspective and then kind of getting rid of it could feel unethical, right? It could be this almost like a form of virtual tourism where we're just being someone for a day or for a moment, and then we really haven't taken away the right things. And so there have been some studies, for example, that someone who was in a gaming experience, they were disabled, playing as someone who was disabled, and then instead of really understanding someone, they had more problematic and biased understandings of them. And so we want to avoid that, right? We don't want to make more biases. We want to have people reduce their biases through perspective taking. We want people to connect through perspective taking. And that can happen because through perspective taking, we can feel like people are more in our group. We can feel like they're more understood by us. They're not as different. We have things in common. We have, you have humanity, right? You have, you have worth and value, and I see you, right? That is a sense of belongingness. And then also being able to express and share our own stories and perspectives also has value, also has meaning. Being able to do that through games, again, also is meaningful. So we can use games to build connection through perspective taking, but we have to really be careful about how we design it. So there's a question here. What issues are being alluded to in regard to perspective taking? Are we talking about lack of authenticity? I don't know if it's authenticity necessarily. I mean, I think that if people have ownership and creative control over their expression of their voice, then that should be authentic. I think where the problems lie is that if someone else comes in and says that they know how to represent someone's perspective, but they really don't, that could be a lack of authenticity. I don't think there's definitely not a problem with overemphasizing a minority viewpoint. I think that it's really that if you just inhabit someone else's, like step into their shoes for a moment, you might come away with something very different than what was intended, right? So for example, there's a game called Spent. It's a free game. You can play it online. It's basically a series of choices, and then you make a choice. And what it's intended to do is to put you in the shoes of someone who is financially insecure. So someone who is struggling and not able to pay their bills or not having enough money to do the things they need to do. And so your job is to make choices so that you can survive for 30 days. And so you have to choose, like, do I buy this pair of shoes? Do I help my kid with their equipment that they need? You decide. But the problem with that game is that it might be giving you a glimpse of some of the choices, but it's not giving you the broader system. So it's making you think that if you just chose better, you would not be poor, right? If you just chose a little better, you would not be impoverished. The problem there is that it's not taking into account all the systemic obstacles and barriers that lead you to not really having a choice, and also to not really experiencing the systemic consequences. Like if you don't get your kid the equipment that they need for doing what it is that they need to do, your kid doesn't have that, and that has consequences for your child. If you don't, spend the money to live closer, then you have to experience the longer commute, right? So that game is not giving you that full picture. And so what happened was people came away thinking that, this almost like if we just made a better choice, that we would be better off, that they would be better off. And they ended up having worse attitudes toward people who are financially insecure. And so it inadvertently made the biases against people worse, instead of better. And so you'd have to like redesign it in a way that helped to support those better understandings of financial insecurity. And so that's how a game can go awry with the wrong design. Can we take the perspective taking and apply it to wargaming, which is often presented as a nuts and bolts technical or historical simulation? Thank you. Yes. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can think about perspective taking, right? So, for example, the different roles that people might play in a simulation, just stepping into it for like a moment may not fully feel the pressures that you might have in a serious decision-making capacity, or it might not show all the systemic factors that you need to think about when you're in that role, right? So there's a lot of ways that through better design, we can help each other understand those kinds of pressures or those kinds of decisions. And I'm going to be talking about systems thinking in just a moment. I just wanted to say that this game right here is called Sweetheart with an X in the middle. So there's an X right in the middle. And it's a game where you're playing as a Black woman who is navigating different choices and trying to understand, how to navigate their home life, their work life, their school life. And of course, it can't fully give you it gives you only a taste. It can't fully tell you exactly what it's like to be a Black woman who is navigating all of these different issues, but it is giving you a taste and giving you a glimpse, and at least helping you to start to think about that, to ask questions, to connect with other people, to find out more. All right. Cursor. Okay. So we had talked a little bit already about wanting to be able to share our stories. And that could also be stories related to war. It could be the story, I understand what you're saying. That's just like a technical simulation or historical simulation. But with even history, the way that you represent it is an interpretation, right? So whether it's an interpretation of a current problem that's happening or a historical one, it's a story, right? It's a story, it's a representation, it's a way of making decisions about how we tell that story. And what we can learn from games is that sharing culture, sharing stories is essential to being able to be included and players should be decision makers of how that story is told, and that we need to understand each other's stories to be able to create a fair future. And this game is called When Rivers Were Trails. It's a game about the Anishinaabe people and policies and U.S. policies, domestic policies that moved indigenous people off their lands, and how that affected them, right? So it's not just about the policy and all of its mechanics, but it's really about the people and how that affected the people. Okay. And then, oops, one more. So thinking about systems. So I've mentioned a lot that we have to be thinking systemically. We have to think about dynamic systems and continue to tinker with those systems over time. That players should not only be co-designing that system, but also challenging it, changing it, helping to understand problems, not only from one direction, but from multiple directions, to see how that system changes over time. And this game right here is a game that costs money. It's called Plague Incorporated. It started out as a game where you're playing as almost like a threat, right? So a virus or a fungus or a bacterium, and you tried to spread yourself as far and wide as possible. But they actually flipped it, and they made a version where you're trying to fight a virus, just like COVID-19, and you're able to use different factors like how you spread information to help to contain the threat or the virus. And you can see how you're doing. You get instant feedback over time about how your changes affect the system. All right. So I'm just going to pause there in case there are any questions, because we're now going to move into a new part. And I just want to see also, how am I doing on time? What time were you hoping that I would, because I have like different potential stopping points. So I just wanted to see how everybody was feeling. Oh, great on time. Okay. Wonderful. So we have until 7. Perfect. Okay. And does that include questions, or are the questions after that? All right, I will keep going, not including. Oh, cool. Okay. So I wanted to show you a couple things that I'm doing to make more inclusive games, in case you could apply some of those principles to your own work. One of the things I'm working on is a Templeton World Charity Foundation grant to create a VR game to help people in Nigeria understand each other's biases. There are over 250 different ethnic groups in Nigeria, including Yoruba, Niger Delta, Igbo, and Hausa peoples. There's many others. Those are some of the major groups. And there was, not even that long ago, a civil war, and there's still these remaining tensions among the different groups. And we want to reduce discrimination, prejudice, and biases against other groups, and to feel like we understand each other better. And so this game is targeting Nigerian youth. You play as someone who is, for example, Hausa, if you're not Hausa. So if you're from like an Igbo or Yoruba group, you might play as someone who's Hausa, and then you would go through their day, their life. You would see the kinds of discrimination that they were facing, and you would respond based on that. Okay, and you would, so we're trying to test out different possibilities. One is that you play as someone who's Hausa. One is that you would observe from almost like a distance someone who's Hausa, and another version would be that you have a role model who's helping you to respond appropriately to those acts of discrimination. And then we're doing research on that to see which one is more effective, most effective. Okay, moving on. Another thing that I'm working on is for the World Health Organization, and this is a teaser trailer, and it's a game to teach the 5 moments of hand hygiene, and that we're trying to make both a mobile and browser-based game to help medical professionals like doctors, nurses, and other professionals to know when these specific moments within a series of clinical tasks, to know when to do hand hygiene, and to also know, do we use a sanitizer? Do we use a sink? And so we're giving them an authentic environment in which to practice that. And I got a question. This game uses VR. Have you noticed in your work that this helps encourage player empathy versus traditional gaming modalities? And that is an open question, right? So there have been some studies that have suggested that it could be encouraging player empathy, and other studies that it didn't, right? So it's really a brand new field that we're trying to study further, and really hasn't been that much research even on traditional gaming modalities and empathy. It's really just in the last decade, there have just been a few studies that have come out, and I'm hoping that this starts to open up more and more to more researchers and more designers. I'm not sure if I can play this video. I will try. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it, but at least you'll be able to see something. So let's see if it works. I'm sorry that you can't hear, but I will send you the link afterwards so that you can listen to it, but at least you can see it. All right, so I will move on. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how I'm also inviting other people to design inclusive, caring games. And so one of the ways that I've been doing that is by hosting and creating a series of game jams that focus on things like identity and other aspects of empathy that we can encourage. And so a game jam, as you all probably know, is this like quick, like 24 or 48-hour event where you're working with other people to make games and in a limited amount of time, and you're focusing on a theme. And so, for example, this game jam that I created, the theme was identity. And so you could make anything. You could make a spy secret identity type game, or you could make something that was more related to your own or other people's identities. And so I came up with some empathy design principles. You could think about them as like a toolkit that, you don't need to use all of these things, but maybe there are a few that you can use that might help support empathy in your game. And I have a report on the results of those game jams. And what I did was I looked at not only the games that people created, but I was actually more interested in the process of design itself. This idea that even just the practice of design might itself help people to feel empathy for others and to practice compassion, and to also just create a more caring environment. And so one thing that I found in looking at that is that from before the event of the game jam to after, they did feel this sense of safety and inclusiveness. And that is really helpful because that feeling of belongingness helps to make people more included, but also this idea of like when you're feeling safe yourself, you're more likely to connect with others and more able to connect with others. So you can find out more, free report on my website. And in addition to doing those game jams in the United States and also around the world, I specifically worked with a group in Lagos, Nigeria, to do those same kinds of game jams in Lagos, Nigeria. And one thing that I wanted to point out with that game the VR game that I'm working on, I'm the only person who's not in Nigeria. Everybody else is from the Lagos Business School and from Lagos, Nigeria and Nigeria. And so it's yes, I'm helping with the game design because that's my skill set, but it's completely retranslated to a Nigerian cultural context because the people that are in Nigeria understand Nigeria, right? And they should be making games for themselves, right? So it's this idea of determining your own, the ways that your own stories should be represented. And so that's why doing these game jams are so important, is because it's not only so that they connect with each other, even though that's really important, but also that they start to learn the skills and start to see that they can make games about their own stories. Okay, so coming close to the end, but I wanted to just summarize what I'm hoping is our future. And what I'm hoping for games is that we prioritize player care and that we build care in communities, that we think about designs that prioritize compassion and human understanding, and that we test and retest our designs to make sure that we are not inadvertently making more biases, right? But that we are ensuring the reduction of biases, that we're ensuring more connection and care for each other. And that we're inviting co-design with our players so that we're in some ways relinquishing our own power as designers, as people who are developing new worlds, and that we are allowing other people to challenge our constraints and to challenge our beliefs in how a world should be designed. And that we are making worlds, making game, whether it's a game, whether it's a world, that we're thinking about how we can create for kindness first. Because imagine if all of our institutions were made with kindness, care, and compassion as its primary goal. And I hope that we can use games to redesign our institutions, our systems, and our world together. And I hope that we can collaborate in the future. And I'd love to hear more questions from you all. Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, but Santiago. Game jams. So there's a lot of ways to join game jams. One of the biggest game jams is the Global Game Jam, usually held in late January, early February every year. And that can be done locally. So you could look up your local chapter and you can find out the closest game jam through their site. And so you probably would start looking in like November, December. But there's also smaller scale game jams throughout the year. The Games for Change organization, which is a really great social impact through games organization, does some game jams, and they're actually hosting an XR game jam at their conference in July. So that's really exciting. There's also a lot of other game jams that are done, like I Thrive is another organization that does game jams. They do ones for social impact as well. But then there's others, like for like smaller scale, could be local game jams. Like at my university where I teach, we host the Global Game Jam. Right. We have a site, right, an official site every year. But we also do a bunch of game jams through our gaming society. You could host your own game jams through the Wargaming Society that you have. We have different organizations that just like to do hackathons. And so there, at the very least, look at Global Game Jam. That's a definite one. But I would also say if you have a local IGDA chapter, so that's the International Game Developers Association chapter, they often do post local game jams that are happening in your city or region. And it's so great to hear that you have for your Georgetown University Wargaming Society, you do playtesting days and design days, so that's great. And you're always welcome to come to Marist for our game jams. Email me and I'll forward you the information. We also do playtesting events and design events as well. So there is I know, I'm so sorry that you have to type in everything. So Rich is saying that in terms of diverging thoughts on why games build empathy, is it possibly related to the different types of fun identified in gaming theory? Yeah, so different players might have fun in different ways. So the same person, for example, might love and have fun doing a discovery game, a strategy game, a more competitive game, or a cooperative game, a social game, right? Because like sometimes, for example, I'm in the mood for like a civilization type game where I'm like trying to do longer term strategy, trying to figure out like where to put my troops, right? So being really strategic about it. And then other times I want to play a social game with my family, right? And interact and have fun through that. There's also this idea, and you can look it up, what's it called? Quantic. I forget the second part of it, but Quantic Foundry, I think, they have a site where they break down motivators. So the idea that different people might have primary and secondary and maybe tertiary motivations for why they play. And so some of those things might be competition, could be strategy, could be social play, could be immersive play, right? So it's different storytelling, right? So different factors, and they've like interviewed thousands and thousands of players to kind of do a clustering analysis to figure out what those were, right? So I actually have my students take that survey and to reflect on whether it captured them well or not. But the truth is that at different times you might have, the same person. Like sometimes I'm very much interested again into like a Fallout immersive story world RPG type game, and other times I want like a strategy game. Other times I just want to play like a quick game like Exploding Kittens, a card game with my family. So the same person could be very complex. So I don't know if it's related to that, but I do think that it's important as a designer to, if you are thinking about designing for certain audiences or certain motivations, that you think about the kinds of elements that help, right, to support that. So for example, if you're thinking about designing for an empathy game for people who like social gaming, right, how can you engage in cooperative, pairing social dynamics in that game, right? Or if you're trying to design for a game that's more like immersive storytelling, role-playing game where you're, how can you level up your role through doing kind acts or to engage in a story that evokes emotions, right? So for sure, those are important, but I think it's more that you have to almost like slice. Are you thinking about a social game? Are you thinking about a strategy game? Are you thinking about a discovery game? Great. There are different tools and design patterns that you can use to better foster empathy for people who are interested in those kinds of games. And then second part of your question, I know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of only getting to the second paragraph here. War games in particular aren't really known for fostering compassion, which is too bad. They should be, right? That could we change that, right? They're mostly about helping us generate insights about realities of the world, such as conflict, escalation, and stress dynamics. Absolutely. Part of the reality of the world, though, is human understanding, is compassion and care, right? So you show what you prioritize showing, right? If you think that the realities of the world, the most important things are something related to conflict, right? And only the negative parts of conflict and not the empathy related parts of conflict, like understanding why people want resources or why they're feeling disempowered. How do we understand how we empower people, right? So there's different ways of representing the same thing, such as conflict, such as escalation, such as stress dynamics, by emphasizing and also thinking through, well, what about how we might understand people and in a way that promotes pro-social behavior, or in a way that promotes human understanding and connection, and thinking about conflict not necessarily in a negative way, but in a way that helps us to understand everybody's needs, helps us to understand people's viewpoints, and to analyze that in a way that everybody feels like they've been listened to, heard, and empowered, right? So there's different ways to engage with that. And it could be that we could change the world through wargaming in a way that prioritizes care, right? I'm wondering if there are some presentation and design techniques we should be including that help be more representative of humanitarian or human impact that aid in inclusion and DEIA, which I assume is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. I'm not sure what the A is, but that sounds awesome. And help us to get the broadest possible insights from participants without excluding anyone. Right, so that, exactly. So it could also be that it's not about necessarily looking at all the human factors in a situation, but that the way that we've set up the game itself is that everybody is included, everybody's voice is heard, everybody feels like they can participate, right? There's so many times when I've entered a space of a game and I felt like I was not supposed to be here, and that no one really wanted to hear what I had to say, and that people felt like I didn't have value. And if there's a way to make it so that everybody who's participating, whatever kind of decision maker they are, doesn't matter what rank they are, what status they have, but that they're all equals in participating in a game, also important, right? So it doesn't have to be that everything is just about educating people in empathy, right? It could just be that the way that the community is designed is that we are feeling included. There's a series of questions that I created for game designers who want to make a more inclusive game. I have not been able to release it yet. I made it for an organization, but they haven't been able to get the clearances to release it. But if you are interested in it, I could send it to you personally. And so you could just email me and I'll send those questions to you. Many of the games you showed us, thank you, Nicholas, for this question. Many of the games you showed us as examples of empathy games were indie games. I did. And that was on purpose because I wanted to show you the wide range of games that are out there, that they're not just console fancy mainstream games. How do I view the state of empathy gaming in the AAA established game publisher space? I mean, it really depends, right? So you've got these like big budget games like Detroit Become Human. And I really like intentionally did not use those kinds of games because I feel like they're inaccessible in some ways, right? I'm talking to an audience and no one can then go and play it, right? I want to show off like the free games that are out there or lower price games. The one game that I did show you that was expensive would be, Animal Crossing New Horizons, right? Because you need a Switch and then you also need the game. That costs a lot. So Detroit Become Human, same kind of issue where you would need a PlayStation 4 or 5. And then you also need Detroit Become Human, and that's already hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But fantastic game, really goes into depth in your decision making, your choices matter. You feel like you understand the characters better. You feel like you're part of the story. It's very immersive. And not only myself who feels like it's a good game, but my students were always talking about how evocative it is. Even a game like Fallout, right? The Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, those are games that are also very expensive but very immersive storytelling. You really feel like you're in this post-apocalyptic world, that you are fighting these zombie-like creatures, and that your choices matter, and that how you act toward people, whether it's good deeds or bad deeds, have an effect on how people treat you. And that makes you think twice, right? It makes you really evaluate your decisions further. In my own research that I've done on a game that is kind of at this point a little bit in the past, the Fable series, I looked at Fable 3, which came out in 2010. And again, at that time when it came out, you needed an Xbox, and I think now it's available on like through Steam. But in that game, you're playing as a king or queen of a world called Albion. You need to make these ethical decisions and decide how you're spending your money, and how villagers will be protected from this coming threat. And so you're making these ethical decisions, like whether or not to preserve or drain a lake. And the people in my study who I looked at were like really very much caring about not only the villagers, not only the characters in this game, but they were also really thinking through their decisions and using empathy related skills to do that. And so even back, this was a long time ago, over 10 years ago, people were already expressing empathy related, not only utterances, but also skills. And so that was really encouraging. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, and that's kind of why I wanted to show these games. Like some of them were made by one person, like the Cat Small made that Sweetheart game, right? Very small indie game. But there's a game out there called Loneliness. It's quite literally just you're playing as like a box and you're floating around, and you can play it. It's online, it's free. And as you play it, you are kind of trying to get to the other boxes, but the other boxes keep dispersing and moving away from you. And it's very evocative. I have my students play it. It's like a 5-minute game. I mean, you're just a box moving around in space, and these boxes are running away. And that was so really made them feel what it was like to be lonely, and also to share stories about feeling lonely. There's another game that came out through a game. It was just like a game jam game. And it was a really small game where you're playing as a comet, and there was this other comet, and you're just playing, like playfully playing with the other comet. And then at one point you have to make a decision where either you get hit by a meteor and you're gone, or your partner gets hit by that same meteor. And in either way, either you're dead, or your friend is lonely now for going off forever. And I had students play it. It was, again, like a 5-minute game. made in a game jam by a group of people, and the students who played that, some of them were crying afterward, really just like talking about that. It doesn't need to be this like highly complex immersive world. You can immerse people just through simple human related gameplay, and really even just abstract squares is enough to evoke emotion. And so I think that's really something that people forget, is that yes, indie games, you can do that even through pen and paper games, even through a game that just has some rules. So very simple rules. Any other questions? Thank you for the questions so far. These are really fantastic. Hopefully someone's still out there. I'm hopefully talking to someone out there. I know none of you can speak, but I really appreciate you coming and participating. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Santiago. I hope I'm getting your names right. Thank you, Richard.